last left Joseph last week, he was languishing in prison. And languishing is a good word. And no matter which way he turned, no matter what good he did, he seemed stuck. And then it came what looked like his way out. And what did we hear? That last sad words, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. And the first phrase in chapter 41, when 2 years had passed. That's hard. Well, let me fill in the gaps. After that 2 years, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Pharaoh had a dream. No one could interpret it. Joseph interpreted the dream. It was right. Joseph was elevated to a position of importance. 7 plentiful years had happened. Joseph was put in charge of the harvest and storing all the resources, which he did well. Now the famine has begun. And Joseph is in charge of all this grain that had been kept through the years. And now Joseph had been given responsibility. It was his moment. And he was up to the task. I do think there are seasons of life. I think that we can just kind of go through a year or a decade or something, and it feels like nothing much happens. And then all of a sudden, there's a moment that we're uniquely geared to, and we're ready. And I'd also say that there's a lot of life that happens in the routine moments that we don't give credit for. And sometimes it takes 20 years, 30 years looking back on those moments and seeing just how important they really were. Winston Churchill was a reviled figure in Great Britain. We think he's a hero, and behind it he is, but for the longest time he was reviled. He was in charge of a military operation in Gallipoli in World War I, 1917. British soldiers invaded, and it went horribly wrong. Tens of thousands of young men died. And Winston Churchill took the blame. And for a long time he was viewed as incompetent, a buffoon, bombastic, nothing more but talented with the language. And then all of a sudden 1940 arrived and the man met his moment. In 1775, there's another man, you might have heard of him, named George Washington, who was given control of the armed forces of these colonies here. And what's odd is, if you go back and look at George Washington, the only time before when he was put in charge of troops was the French and Indian War, and trust me, it did not go well. He lost, and lost badly. And in the first big battle he commanded in 1776, the Battle of New York, it went just as badly. In fact, it'd be hard-pressed to find a way a general could botch a battle more than he botched New York in 1776. But he learned, and the man met his moment. Joseph had languished in prison. He had spent time as Potiphar's servant. That went bad. Spent time in prison. That didn't go well. Finally, the man and the moment were meeting, and up to this point, Joseph had risen to the occasion. But his big moment's happening, and that's what we're going to start talking about this week. His reaction will determine how he will be remembered. His brothers are on their way to Egypt, and he doesn't know it. Not his ascension to the ruling class, not his administration of grain. He's going to be remembered by how he handles the moment with his brothers. Starting with chapter 42, verses 3 through 7. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Let me just stop right there. If you remember earlier, Joseph was clearly the favored son, and the brothers knew about it. And the reason why he was favored, if you remember, is Joseph was the eldest son of Rachel. That's the wife, the favored wife, really, of Jacob. Later, they had another son. That's Benjamin. And he's being the favored again. He's willing to send the other sons. Yeah, go down to Egypt. I know it's going to be a hard journey. You might starve to death. Yeah. Get us food. Benjamin's staying here. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. Now it's natural. I know we're thinking, why didn't they recognize him? Well, there's a couple reasons. First one is, when they left Joseph, he was 17. Teenager, probably skinny, and now he's fully grown. He's probably in his 30s. They wouldn't recognize him. Plus, he has on the garb of Egypt. Probably clean shaven. Some of the pictures released on the wall, maybe he had the bald head with the ponytail sticking out of the top of it. That's a bad look for everybody. Maybe that threw him off. He probably had some Egyptian headdress on, maybe establishing him as part of the ruling class. It would be natural for them not to recognize him. I'm skipping ahead to verse 21. In the meantime, he has said, you're going to go back to Canaan and get your brother and your father. These are the brothers talking. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother, Joseph. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why this distress has come on us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep. But he came back and spoke to them again, and he had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. I want us to see there's been quite the change in Joseph in these last, dozen years. Now, there's some old still there. I think he wanted to make them shake in their boots for a while, or shake in their sandals. And so he spoke very harshly to them. I think he enjoyed that. And I think maybe when he had Reuben bound, he made quite the show of it. And I bet there's part of Joseph that liked that a little bit. If I hadn't been in his shoes, there probably would have been a little bit of that I would have enjoyed. But at the same time, he made sure they're taken care of. He gave them provisions for the trip back to be sure they had enough. He even went the step, he returned to them the silver that they had brought to pay for the grain. Now, this is a huge sign for me. Look at the reaction of his brothers. In the story, if you read it, they were fearful. When they opened up the sacks later in the trip, they looked and went, it says they were frightened. They're frightened because they know they might be now accused of stealing it. Now Egypt has a reason to come after them. Maybe come after their family. They'd be accused of stealing. This is the proof. They'd have no way to defend themselves. And they'd be in trouble. This terrified them. But I think what he did was, Joseph saying, they need it more than I do. Sent back grain, plus provisions for the journey, to be sure they had enough. This doesn't seem to be a part of a production. Because there's no mention of planning with the officials or anything like that. I want us to see, this is not a cheap forgiveness. This is what we do in our culture. We have a lot of cheap forgiveness in our culture at a lot of different levels. We do a lot of things publicly. We have a public sin. Some politician will say some horrible, awful thing, or some sports star or movie star, and then later on, they apologized via Twitter for what they said in front of 1 million people. They apologized via Twitter. That's not how you do it. Public sin, the forgiveness, the apology has to match the sin, or it's not an apology. if I do some big public thing, in the middle of my sermon, let me tell you something. Let me tell you how dumb it was. Well, Ryan's a big dum-dum, and it will almost match what he did. And they go, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have said that. And so then, Ryan, I'm sorry I called you a dum-dum. Text, there, boom, it's handled. No, it's not. Public sin, public apology. The apology must cost me something. Forgiveness always requires change, or it's cheap. Here's the other thing we're good at in our society. Someone gets frustrated. Same situation. I get frustrated, call Ryan, dum-dum behind closed doors. Just he and I. No one else hears it. He's in my office. I call him a dum-dum. And now I want to prove what a good person I am. So now for everybody, oh, let me unburden my soul in front of you. Oh, I'm so sorry. I want everybody to know that I called Ryan a dum-dum behind my closed doors this week. See, that's also wrong. Because now just to show how good, boy, look how sensitive I am, I've taken what's private, now I've made it public. We have a lot of cheap apologies and cheap forgiveness. Someone says they're sorry, and we go, okay, yeah, I accept your apology. Roll our eyes, and we still don't want anything to do with them. That's not real forgiveness. Forgiveness requires a change of behavior. We are a culture awash in cheap forgiveness. No intent, no follow through, no life change. At every level, forgiveness requires behavioral change. If I'm mad at my wife, or you're mad at your husband, or mad at your brother or your sister, and there's an apology, you better shift back and say, I forgive you, and your behavior must change. There's also been change in the brothers. They are learning right now a hard lesson that I think is forgotten a lot today. Sin just doesn't go away. It hangs on. It lingers. There is no such thing as a private sin. Oh, we think there is. Sin always breaks out of whatever box we try to hide it in. Even if we think, well, no one will see. No one will see. No one will see what I'm doing on my computer at night. No one's at home. No one will see what I'm doing. But it changes us. It affects our relationships. It affects the way we talk to other people. It affects the way we value others. Even the most private sin has public implications. And what if we don't know anything by now, we should know this. The difference between a private sin and a public sin is one set of eyes that you haven't accounted for. Ears that are listening. Sin always seeks to spread. Sin is private right up until the point when it isn't, and we can't control when that change happens. We think we can, but we don't. And what the brothers admitted, they said, I know why this is happening to us. There's an accounting. We should have listened. When Joseph was pleading for his life, we should have been accounting. See, they think he's dead. Anybody sold into slavery, that'd be a natural reaction. They're going to work him to death. He's going to die somewhere. He's going to be killed as a punishment. We've lost that sense, I think, of culture. Now, there was a time, maybe the pendulum was way too far over here. God's waiting for you to step off the line, and when you step off the line, he's going to get you. He's going to zap you. He's just waiting for you to do something wrong. That's probably wrong. But we've gone way too far now to the other side. Everything's a license. Oh, it's okay. Nothing. It's all right. It's all right. Oh, God will understand. I'll ask for forgiveness later. Not a big deal. I'm better than him. I'm still better than her. Everything's good. We forget that there's an accounting. Plus, just in everyday life, sin fractures relationships. Sin diminishes me all the time. Sin is counted against us for our own good. Paul writes that in Galatians. It kind of meant to lock us in, to let us know when we've gone too far. It's meant to teach us here and no further. It's supposed to let us know that things are wrong so we realize that we need to be redeemed. Paul writes in Romans chapter 7, I wouldn't even have known what coveting was until there was a commandment that says do not covet. I was just merrily rolling along in life, wanting everything, every nice thing that someone has, and then the law says do not covet, and I realized, wow, I probably should be happy with what I have. But that's for our own good. So there's a change in Joseph and a change in his brothers. But this story is going in a direction. Think of all the things that Joseph could have done. He could have had him killed. That would have been common in the ancient world. Hey, remember me? I'm your brother. Remember me? Guards, out back. You know what to do. That would have been common. He could have said, remember me? Remember my you bowing down? Well, for the next 10 years, you are going to be my slaves. You're going to have daily reminder of bowing down. That would have been kind of an eye for an eye. Joseph didn't do that either. He could have just given them just enough grain for half a day and sent them on their way and said, don't come back. He didn't do that either. Joseph was planning for a restoration. That's how he reacted to his moment. He said, here's what I want you to do. I'm keeping a brother. And I want you to go back home and I want you to get your father and your other brother and come back here. There is a planned reconciliation. There is a goal, and the goal wasn't revenge. This is a lesson for all of us. Joseph had every reason in the world to be angry, really, really angry. And Joseph's response was to provide a way back. Here's what we think. Someone does us wrong, and here's what we think. We think, you know what? They owe me an apology. I'm going to sit here on top of my holy hill until they apologize. I'm going to make them climb up and apologize to me. And when I know they're serious, oh, so now you're going to apologize. Okay, I forgive you. Except we really haven't. We have responsibility. Yes, even if I'm wrong, I have responsibility for forgiveness to take place. I have to provide a way back. I have to provide a pathway and make it easy. But we tend to not make it easy. We tend to make it tough. Reconciliation always requires someone to give. One of the smallest books in the New Testament is the book of Philemon. Philemon's a book about a runaway slave. The slave's name is Onesimus. Now, when I say slave in the Roman world, that's not what we mean. Slavery was a paid position, sometimes highly, but you were locked in to the person who was paying your salary. You couldn't leave their household unless A, you paid off, you redeemed, you paid them enough to buy your freedom, or you fulfilled the length of your contract. Then you're allowed to go free. And then when you went free, you often moved to Corinth, but that's a different sermon for a different day. So Onesimus lived in Colossae, and he probably heard Paul preach about freedom in Christ, and he goes, hey, that sounds good. I'm going to go where Paul is. And he took off. And he's with Paul. And Onesimus is really good friends with Paul. Philemon, who's also really good friends with Paul, hears about this and says, Paul, we got a problem. So here's Paul. Paul has one friend who's away, a runaway slave, who expects Paul to say, you shouldn't be a slave anyway, you stay here. Philemon is a friend of Paul who expects Paul to say, You got to fulfill your contract. You got to go back. We in 2021 want Paul to give a big political speech and say, slavery's evil all the time. Vote for my candidate. And when Paul doesn't say that, we go, Paul is pro-slavery. Horse feathers. That is cheap and lazy biblical exegesis. Here's what Paul does. He puts his arm around Onesimus. Says, Onesimus, I'm sending you back. But I'm sending you back with a letter. I want you to take this and give it to Philemon. And the letter says, you can read it. Philemon, you owe me your very life. I have no idea why Philemon owes his very life to Paul. You owe me your very life. I could order you to do this, but I'm not, because I want it to come from you. I want it to be your idea. I'm sending Onesimus back, but when he gets back to you, he can't be your slave anymore. He's got to be your brother. And you need to accept him as a brother. And then there's this line. And if anyone owes you anything, charge it to my account. I will pay it back. So here's Paul with this idea. Someone owes someone a debt that they can't pay. So Paul says, I will pay the debt that they can't so that person can be restored and have freedom. Where on earth would Paul have learned such an idea? He's putting Christianity into practice. And Paul's providing a path back. Let me just end the story. One of the things we have is that one of the first leaders of the early Christian church was a guy in Colossae named Onesimus. Pretty good evidence how this story ended up. We have to provide an easy way back. We have to provide a path back. That does not mean it's easy. That means we have to swallow a little bit. It means we have to give in a little bit. It means we can't say what we want to say. It means we're not maybe going to hear what we want to hear, but we have to provide a pathway back all the time. If we don't, we allow other people to live in our head rent-free. And that gets painful. And that takes a toll. It takes a toll on us psychologically. It takes a toll on us physically. It takes a toll on us spiritually. Pastor, I know what you need to be doing. You need to preach more about righteousness and how sinners must repent. You need to talk about what they're doing out there, and you need to condemn them really loud. That'd be a good sermon. Yeah, it probably would be a good sermon, but it doesn't really get the ball past the line of scrimmage. It doesn't put anyone on base. I think more good Christians, good people stumble here than perhaps any other area of life. And then we live amongst the fractured relationships around us. They're fractured because it's up to us. We got to provide a way back. Joseph had every opportunity, every reason, and the power to do a whole range of things. And instead, he decided, I'm going to find a way back and be restored to all my brothers again. He learned that. We should learn that from our example of what Christ did for us. Who, in every way, could have said a lot of different ways. Well, those people, they're sinning all the time. Forget about them. Forget about them. Or he could have said, well, just wait to be sure all of them keep all the commandments, and once they keep them all good, then I'll accept them. Well, God said, you know what? I'm going to send my son. God the Son is going to walk in their shoes and take on their penalty and take all their insults. I'll pay the price for them so they have a way back for me. He says he did it. That's how we should act.